Good afternoon, and thank you for joining our webinar series, Navigating Business in 2021. I'm your host today, Sherry Bourbeau, and I'm really looking forward to today's discussion, preparing your organization for unprecedented budget uncertainty. Now, some of you may be saying, budget uncertainty is nothing new. I face it every year, and that may be true. What we want to talk about today is how you can prepare yourselves, particularly given the magnitude of the uncertainty that could be facing you, whether you understand that now or you realize that and are planning for it, or it may be a surprise for you in the future. There are ways that you can come through it and be really successful, and we're going to talk through that today. But before we get started, I want to go through a couple of admin things. First off, WB is very proud to now be part of the Serco family. So because we recently joined Serco, you may hear us refer ourselves as both. You may hear us refer ourselves as WBB and Serco. Please know we're one and the same, and we are very excited to be part of that family. The other admin note that I just want to let you know is when you join the GoTo meeting, your mic is muted. That doesn't mean that you can't ask questions, and we invite you to ask questions or give us your thoughts. And you could do that throughout the presentation using the Q&A feature that you should see on your screen. Please also know that if we do not get to your question in real time today, we will follow up with you and address any questions or thoughts that you may have. We will also be sending out all reference materials and the presentation that you will be hearing today. So without further ado, I am incredibly excited to introduce my colleague, Al Mosley, who is an expert in helping organizations think about how to align their resources, their personnel, their financial resources to their highest mission priorities, and to understand where organization risk may lie in doing so. Al has been with Serco WBB since 2010, and he is our product manager for Serco WBB's organization, optimization, and alignment of resources, and other related models that we have used very successfully as decision support tools. So Al, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. So let me just go jump right in. So I talked about what is unprecedented budget uncertainty. What does that really mean, and why is it so unprecedented, if you will?
Well, thanks, Sherry. Happy to be here with you and discuss this important topic. So as you said in your intro, yes, some budget uncertainty is normal. Most organizations do their best to plan, and then they often have to react to changes when the budget is actually finalized. And often those changes are imposed with very little analysis behind them, though, more for political changes than anything else. However, you've got quite a bit more uncertainty today than in a typical year. I mean, it's a change of administration, obviously have some significant shifts in priorities, and we're going to see significant changes in funding to follow those shifts in priorities. So it definitely increases the amount of uncertainty in the current environment.
So yes, and I understand that every time we change administrations or something of an anomaly happens in the world, that throws a different dynamic. What would you say makes this present time, though, different? Because those anomalies are also not new.
Yeah, you're right again, Sherry. But there's quite a few other factors that we need to consider. So if you look at the current challenges of getting any legislation passed in Congress over the last couple of decades, it's very problematic. I mean, only 4 times in the last 40 years have all of the congressional budget bills for appropriations been passed on time. The last time was in 1996. So we get this ongoing challenge every year with continuing resolutions and budget uncertainty that's been getting worse and worse in recent years. And given the current environment in Congress and the looming battle over the debt ceiling again, it's highly unlikely that we'll get all the budget bills passed on time once again. And additionally, as I said, it is a new administration, so they're working through this process of each of the budget bills. And it's going to be a battle for every one of them. And then we expect to see some dramatic shifts in where the funding lies.
So the new administration, the debt ceiling. There's another dynamic here that I'd like to get your thoughts on, and it's something that I think everybody listening can relate to, particularly given the last 18 months. I would assume that the pandemic is an additional factor. How is that, in your mind, impacting uncertainty?
Oh, absolutely, Sherry. That is another big factor that's relevant today to this discussion on uncertainty. As you know, many federal agencies have shifted their focus and mission and response to the pandemic for good reasons. Has budget implications as well. And then Congress passed unprecedented legislation last year that resulted in a $3 trillion deficit at the end of the year. That's higher deficit than we saw at the peak spending of World War II. It's definitely not a sustainable level on its own with all the impact that has for debt payments, interest payments, and allocation of the remaining discretionary budget. And additionally, the pandemic has also put a bunch of other uncertainty around work, workplace, workforce. How many people are going to return to work? What's telework going to look like? What does that mean for how I get my mission done? What does it mean for my budget? How do I fund all the IT resources I need? So it definitely has added a lot more uncertainty with the pandemic this year.
So I'm not one of the organizations that were the recipients of, the stimulus packages or workplace and telework doesn't seem to really be an issue for me. So who is affected by this situation? Because I'm really not sure that I should care about it. What would you say to anybody listening that may have that thought process?
Well, it's definitely a valid approach, and some people might feel that. But given all of the shifts in priorities with this whole $3.5 trillion budget blueprint Congress is trying to approve, the pending infrastructure bills, we're going to see major shifts in priorities, as I've said. Uh, Fundamental changes to the social safety net across the country, many initiatives to fund green energy and climate change. We're going to see changes all over the place, and paying for this agenda, especially given the current budget situation and the deficits we already have, is going to require some substantial shift in funding across all lines. So it's hard to really say who is at risk at this point, and that's part of the whole dynamic of the unprecedented uncertainty. And even if you're an agency that expects to see plus ups, because you're going to have additional responsibilities with these new priorities, that's still its own problem of figuring out how to rapidly manage changes like on that scale without undermining the performance or increasing risk to your mission.
So that's interesting. It's a much better problem to have, I would think. It's an interesting thought that you bring up, that I am one of the organizations that believes I'm going to be plussed up, and all indications are that I am going to get more money than I need, whether it's for my new programs or to augment my existing programs. So why is that? Why is that a challenge? I think that would be good news and everybody would be celebrating. Why would I need to be listening in today?
Well, we've seen a number of agencies rapidly plussed up in recent years in response to changes from Congress and the president's priorities. And they found dramatic challenges rapidly scaling up capabilities if they don't do it in a systematic fashion. So understanding the direct connection between your workforce, other resources, and your mission requirements is really key to doing that in a smart way so that you don't get unbalanced and cause other problems, second and third order effects that weren't considered. So just getting additional funding, yeah, that may be a great thing, but that's definitely a much bigger problem set to manage sometimes. And additionally, in the current environment, we'll also add in the discussion I'll mention on the Evidence Act that came out, 2018, the Evidence-Based Policymaking Act. That meant that every basic program gets a lot more scrutiny now when it comes to budget time. Agencies have to be able to demonstrate the value and the performance and relevance of all those programs. Backed by data, it requires a substantial higher burden of proof to show why your programs are performing and why they should continue funding. So as you're ramping up capability or facing budget cuts in this environment, there's a much higher standard that has to be presented to make your case in the current environment.
I think that's an excellent point because I know for myself, when I first became aware of the Evidence Act, I thought it was solely tied to budget formulations, preparing and defending my budget. And you're making the point that it also talks to program performance, and the two are somehow aligned or should be aligned. Do I have that about right?
Yeah, you do, Sherry. And the program performance is a piece that's been under reported, if you will, in many recent years. So that was part of the shift in focus, was to make sure we don't just continue funding the same things and keep adding more programs. We want to try to find those programs that are really working, really doing what they were designed to do, and then phase out the other ones. So there's definitely a dual track in this in the Evidence Act for A, justifying your initial requirements, and then B, continued funding based on program performance. And those are interconnected based on the data you can present.
Okay, so in a typical year, pre-Evidence Act, it took time. It took a lot of time to respond to the budget. It was time that you never really had because the budget drills and excursions and questions would come fast and furious with very little time to respond. I don't see that changing. So how would you, what would you say to that? How would you comment?
Mhm. Yeah, and most agencies spend a lot of time developing their initial budget, and then once it's submitted, you're right. You get budget drills and look at this, look at that, all the different scenarios that come down. And then in the end, that most of the budget decisions are made and changes forced on implementation without a whole lot of time to really look at the second and third order effects I was talking about of each of those. Sometimes if it's cuts, they'll come down quickly and they'll be cookie cutter or salami slice where everybody takes an equal cut in some areas. We all know that doesn't work very well because an equal slice in one agency is significantly different than it is in some other one, depending on what their mission is and where they were in staffing ahead of time. It doesn't take a look at efficiencies that have already been made or how their programs are performing. So those are definitely not preferred approaches. But you're right, that keeps happening, and that's year over year, that's still the way we have to respond. The ability to respond to those effectively is the same as the ability to be able to make your case for the Evidence Act. It's if you can truly articulate the impact those cuts would have, show you the changes to your mission performance, where the risk would be, you can better define the damage that those cuts would do and better mitigate how to withstand the cuts if they do come down that way.
So I think intuitively that makes sense. So let me drill down a little bit farther, if I may, and let's talk some specifics. What should I be doing to prepare? I mean, I understand the Evidence Act as you've described it. I know that I need to be able to defend my budget. I have done cookie cutter, salami sliced, or organizations have done cookie cutter, salami sliced. So what should I be doing to prepare? And is now too late or too early? What should I be doing now?
Well, it's definitely not too early. The sooner you start preparing is always better. But I guess I'd reverse the question back on you, Sherry. In your roles in some of the government jobs you held, how did your agency respond to cuts like this? Were you prepared? Did you have the data you needed to effectively respond to them?
Well, it's interesting that you say that because I'll take my time with the Navy as one example. And we were faced, much like the Navy systems commands are today, with a 25% civilian or 25% budget cut, and the civilian personnel were in play, if you will. You could not set them aside. So the workforce was potentially impacted. We didn't have the resources that we could clearly define what would happen if we took a 25% cut. So we did gather some data, and this is my first my first proof point that says data is your friend. Data is powerful because we were able to look at some of our acquisition programs, both those that were doing remarkably well and those that were doing less well. And we found that one of the common threads was the staffing and resourcing. And we had an imbalance in staffing and resources. We were able to take that forward. Not only did we avoid the 25% cut, we were able to get plussed up a little in the headquarters civilian personnel. It was a huge victory. So I'm here to tell you, I'm a believer in the data. Now, I wish I had had more time because we had to throw that together very quickly. It happened to work for us. So what if people didn't have that kind of data at their disposal? What can they be doing today?
Okay, yeah, so in general, we see three basic strategies that could really help agencies weather the storm that's coming. And as you pointed out, you need good data to effectively employ any of them, and we'll talk a bit about that. The first strategy is basically what you did in your previous job. You try to avoid the cuts as much as you can. I mean, obviously, everybody would love to do that. But in the current environment, in order to do that, you really have to use evidence-based arguments to illustrate the impact of the cuts. I've talked about that already, but you have to be able to show that you've already implemented efficiencies, done everything you can ahead of this current situation to try to mitigate it. And again, it takes very good data to do this effectively.
So can you give me some examples of best practices?
Well, I'll give you an example where we saw an agency successfully employ the avoid strategy. So in 2011, when the Department of Defense was starting to withdraw from Iraq the first time, they were looking to reduce funding and reduce in strength in a number of places. And they came down to a number of the supporting organizations and expected them to take a 10% cut right off the top. We had a number of them that we had been working with, a group of similar organizations, already collecting data on their work, their workforce, their mission priorities, and where their risk lays. So they had a pretty good understanding of their requirements. This drill came down. These particular organizations had been underfunded during the peak periods of Iraq War. And rather than taking the 10% cut, they were able to illustrate the risk to their mission that those previous underfunded periods had incurred and what an additional 10% cut would do. They were able to very clearly show what they would not be able to do anymore, what tasks would have to drop off the table. And instead of taking the 10% cut, they actually got a plus up during that budget cycle. So it can work if you're properly prepared.
It seems so. So you can be successful with this evidence, with this data to support your decisions if you're prepared. You mentioned, I think, a three-pronged strategy. What's the next strategy?
Well, the next strategy is what we call optimize. That's when you're in the midst of any budget drill, you want to use data and analytics to optimize your resources to maximize performance and minimize risk. And I've touched on this several times already, but you need to understand how to properly realign the people, their skills, and other resources to best effect so that you can reduce the disruptions on your workforce. By doing it this way, if cuts come down quickly, you can rapidly respond by modeling the results and understanding the impact before you cause those disruptions on your workforce. So being able to understand those impacts up front is priceless, and it allows you to do this strategy successfully.
So I would imagine many organizations know what they know and they don't know what they don't know. And by that, I mean, I think, I could put myself in an organization, say, I believe I'm aligned appropriately. I believe I'm efficient. Where have you seen this strategy, this element of your three-pronged strategy? Where have you seen it employed successfully?
Oh, I'll give you an example here. 2012, when the sequestration came out, one of our other happy budget times in the government, imposed furloughs on all civilian employees 1 day a week, results in an instant 20% cut in your civilian labor capacity. We had another organization we were working at who, like you, thought they were aligned properly and they had figured out basically how to optimize their mission. And then they got thrown this dramatic curveball overnight. But because they had this data and they had the ability to optimize it rapidly and understand the impact, they could model the impact this 20% cut would take. They could identify where their risk would be. They could make some realignments and develop mitigation strategies. It enabled them to weather that sequestration period with very minimal reduction in mission performance so that their customers didn't really see any impact. It was very dramatic for them.
Yeah, that's a great story, and it shows the positive effects of what you're offering. What's the third?
Well, the third strategy is you may have to do all three of them in succession, but if the others don't work, it's to recover. So whatever you have to do, whatever is finally imposed on you, you still need to be able to figure out, how do I get back on a course to mission performance to get my job done the way I need best? If you take one of those fair share cuts, you have to use the data to smartly realign the workforce and other resources so that you can mitigate it effectively. That way you will understand the other impacts behind that, and you can model the different scenarios to find your best path out of this as different parameters change or as your environment changes. And again, you need good data to do this.
So I'm keenly aware of time, and there's so much more I want to cover with you. So let me just summarize what I think we've heard today, and then just take us in a slightly different direction. I think in what I'm hearing is prepare, prepare, prepare. Prepare your data, prepare your strategies, think about whether you're going to get plussed up. What does that mean? Prepare, 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 and use the data to support the decisions and recommendations that you're going to take forward. Is that a good summary of where we are so far?
Yeah, that's a very good summary, Sherry. Preparation is definitely key to managing any potential turmoil that could come out of this. Because as I've said, once the cuts begin or the changes happen, it's too late to really do thoughtful analysis, and all you're doing is reacting. That's very disruptive on the workforce and the customers, and you'd like to minimize that as much as possible. So by moving swiftly now to get the detailed understanding of your resources you need and the linkage of those resources to your mission, it'll definitely prepare you for any coming budget drills. It'll prepare you for Evidence Act-based submissions of your budget, and be able to effectively defend your resources going forward.
So that sounds like it's straight out of a textbook, and I'm buying in. I'm worried that I don't have either the people, processes, or tools that will make this an efficient drill. So what kind of tools or resources are out there, or would you suggest?
Well, there are a lot of tools out there and a lot of ways to approach this problem. I mean, as you know, we use our organization optimization and alignment of resources, or ORS model. It's one effective way to align resources to your mission priorities. We also have digital transformation tools and a number of other ways to look at and improve business processes. But these are just some examples. The key is position yourself with the data now that you need to make those decisions. There are several ways you could do this. Just find some of those tools and get started on this, because the more you understand your workforce and your resources now, the much better shape you'll be in later. In fact, we view this as a management best practice anytime to ensure that your resources are aligned with your priorities. So you would always want to know that, but it does take analysis to determine that. It takes time, it takes resources, and it takes specialized skill, things that are often in short supply in many agencies because they're busy doing their day jobs. But preparing now is definitely a lot less painful than having to react later.
So thank you for that. I do want to leave time I see that we've got a couple of questions from the audience. So let me just ask you this final question. Why aren't people doing this? Why isn't this being done across organizations, and why hasn't it been done year over year over year?
Well, it is done in some places, and agencies do their best to do this because all leaders like to think they're putting their resources where they matter most. But often drawing the connections between the disparate data sources you have, understanding the connections so that you can really see across an organization the impact that change can make. It's a complex undertaking, and as I said, it takes specialized skills, usually some specialized tools, although you can use off-the-shelf business intelligence platforms to get a pretty good start on this. Just by connecting your data in ways that you've never done before will allow you to get deep insights on the resources and the impact of them on your mission. But you're right, it's difficult to do, and it does take some planning ahead of time. and you've got to step back from your day job to do it.
Okay, so here's some final thoughts, and then Al, I'd like to share with you some of the questions from the audience. So to sum up what I think I've heard today is, do not wait. Get started now. Get your arms and hands around the data that you have. Start to understand it. Start to understand how it can demonstrate a value and a value proposition, whether it's your program performance, relevance of your programs, or any way that you can put forward the value that those funds and those programs bring. If you can do that, you are in a much better position to defend your argument, and that could be to secure more funds or to avoid cuts. This takes time. Don't wait to get started. Get started now. There are tools available to help you make this an easier methodology for you to use. So Al, let me turn to some questions, and we've got several, so I doubt we're going to be able to get to all of them, but we will follow up with the people who have sent them, and they will be included in the package that we post. One of them I think we haven't touched on at all, and that has to do with risk. And the question is, what are the risks that either deliberatively or intentionally, maybe even unintentionally, can come from this exercise and methodology that you're talking about?
So risk, I have touched on risk a bit, but you're right. There is risk of doing this because you may find things about your organization that you didn't want to find, but that's okay. It's better to know where the problems are and rather than have somebody else uncover them for you. But again, the biggest risk is in not doing this and having to respond without preparation. I'll just give you one other example I can throw in here that talked about an organization that successfully employed these kind of strategies. It was a government organization with actually an agency within DoD we were working with in 2014-15, helping them do workforce analysis and some other process stuff to consolidate a large program that's funded by another agency under their management because it had been run in a haphazard fashion and they didn't have good tracking of where the money was going. So they were going to consolidate the program into one office, and they were being given a number of people that everyone had identified was required and a budget that they thought represented the cost of the program. By bringing in all the existing program data that they had, connected it with business intelligence, and you were able to then understand the full cost of the program they were taking on. And we were able to illustrate to them that they were about to take a $30 million hit in a cost to the program that were not being properly funded. So again, the risk of not doing that analysis would have been significant when they had to absorb those kind of costs in a current year.
I think that's an excellent place to stop and leave this. I know I could go on for many, many more hours to talk about this, and I believe our listening audience has, you've given them much to think about. There are some other questions and we will follow up, as I said, with those answers. So with that, I want to thank you for joining us today. As I said, if we didn't get to your question, we'll send you a follow-up after this webinar, along with any notes and any references that you might have heard about in our conversation. We look forward to seeing you next month, where we will continue our Navigating Business webinar series with Frame Your Future with Strategic Foresight. When some leaders think of the future, if they think about it at all, consciously think about it at all, they often approach it from a disadvantaged perspective. We don't have to let that future take us by surprise. Strategic foresight brings discipline to the innovative capability of looking to the long view. We look forward to you joining us again the third Thursday of every month, so September 16th at 1 p.m. Eastern. Thank you for your time today and enjoy the rest of your day.